Okay, guys, at this time, I'm going to go ahead and we'll get the webinar started. So good morning, everyone. Thank you for registering for today's Barley Snyder and Elsner Bell & Associates webinar surrounding the legal considerations and practical human resource solutions surrounding COVID-19. I just want to make a few comments for everyone attending the webinar before I introduce our speakers. All attendees will remain muted with their videos off throughout the event. And to submit a question, we ask that you push that through the Q&A portion that you can find at the bottom of your screen. Please use the chat box and send your message by selecting to all panelists, and we'll do our best to answer those at the end. We also recommend that you choose to hide non-video panelists by clicking the three dots on a non-video panelist and choosing to hide them. This is the best way that we feel to view the presentation, video, and chat at the same time. The event will be recorded and it will be sent to all participants after we wrap up. So if you don't receive that, please reach out to me. And finally, should you have any technical difficulties during the webinar, you can reach out to me directly in the chat or email me at hbriggs@hanoverchamber.com. I would first like to introduce Leslie Bell with Elsner Bell & Associates. Leslie is a seasoned executive with more than 25 years of executive human resource expertise. Her experience spans from high technology telecom to engineering and manufacturing, from publishing to privatized education. Leslie's expertise encompasses strategic staffing, benefits and compensation, training, employee relations, compliance, and the full human resources arena. Thank you for joining us this morning, Leslie. And with Barley Snyder, we have Mike Crocenzi. If you have any employment issues that could keep you up at night or may derail your company's growth, Mike would be the best person to reach out to. He works to solve problems for clients and give them peace of mind. From the boardroom to the plant floor to the courtroom, he's able to provide practical solutions and relentless focus on reaching the successful outcome you desire. So thank you, Mike. At this time, I'm going to turn it over to Mike to begin the webinar.
Great, thank you, Haley. Appreciate everything you've done to make this happen today. Glad to be with you, Leslie, again. It's hard to believe it's been almost a year since we did one of these webinars together for the Chamber. And thanks again to the Chamber for sponsoring this webinar, and we hope you enjoy the hour that we have together. As always with these webinars, we have to give a disclaimer that we're not providing any specific legal advice to you or your company. This is general information only. The information changes rapidly. Just within the last couple of weeks, we had a major law passed by Congress that has changed the landscape on a number of HR items pertaining to COVID that Leslie will be delving into today. So that's how things change so quickly, as we have known throughout this last year. So information that you're going to be hearing this morning may be outdated by Monday. Just keep that in mind. Always make sure that you're checking the news, looking for updates from Leslie and from Barley Snyder regarding changes in COVID, the vaccines, and restrictions pertaining to your businesses. Next slide. So I want to talk about the vaccines. We're getting a lot of questions from employers, clients, on whether they can mandate the vaccinations, what's going on with the vaccinations throughout Pennsylvania. How is that going to affect employers as we move through the spring and the summer? Just to give you a brief background on the COVID-19 vaccine process, we currently are using emergency use authorization to have these vaccines provided to people throughout the country. The FDA and the CDC have now approved 3 makers of vaccines, as we all know, and they're being rolled out throughout the country and even here in Pennsylvania. And we'll talk about what emergency use means versus regular use later on in the presentation. Next slide. Pennsylvania is currently still in phase 1A for the vaccinations. Here is a very dense slide, but it gives you an overview of who is able to get the vaccinations at this point. We're hoping to move into 1B soon, but it all depends on how many vaccines Pennsylvania starts to receive in the next few weeks or months. Next slide. This is 1B. We're getting close to that from what I understand. The governor has indicated that the Johnson & Johnson one-shot vaccination will be available for many of these 1B persons. He did move up, as you know, teachers that are currently now eligible for the vaccination, and they're getting the J&J. So once they move through the teachers, the plan is once they get more J&J vaccinations, they'll move to this list. Next slide. And this is phase 1C. Hard to tell what's going to happen. The members of these groups, as well as the phasing, may change depending on the availability of the vaccination. They could skip 1C altogether if they get enough dosages and just make it available to the general public. Next slide. So you may have seen this card if you've been vaccinated or had a family member or friend vaccinated. This is a card that's being published by the CDC. We'll talk about what that means for employers here in a little bit. Next slide. Okay, so let's talk about mandatory use of the vaccination. And I mentioned earlier that the vaccines have been approved under an emergency use authorization by the FDA. Typically what happens with a vaccination is it goes through a lengthy regulatory review process that can take more than a year or two, and it's part of the regular authorization process for the FDA. Because of the emergency situation with COVID, they used what is called an emergency use authorization to fast track the COVID vaccine. There is a statute that allows for emergency use authorization, and the Secretary of HHS establishes conditions for that use, which you can find if you look it up on the website. But essentially, there are 3 or 4 requirements that primarily the vaccination producers or manufacturers have to let people know about the vaccine. And one of the key issues regarding the conditions is that the CDC says a person has a right to refuse the vaccine. So what does that mean for an employer? There is a school of thought from legal scholars and attorneys throughout this country that because the COVID vaccine has only been approved under an emergency use authorization, employers cannot mandate the vaccine. Just as many people believe that, there are just as many lawyers and legal scholars that believe the contrary, that the statute that authorizes an emergency use is not that broad, and that employers can go ahead and mandate the vaccine. So it's somewhat muddled at this point. It does appear that at least the EEOC has given the green light for mandatory vaccinations. I know of at least one lawsuit filed in federal court out west, I believe in New Mexico, in which an employee was fired for not receiving the vaccine that the employer indicated was mandatory for all employees that could get it. So we'll see how this is going to develop over time. I will tell you that from our perspective at Barley Snyder, our clients are not mandating the vaccine. Many are strongly encouraging it, which we'll talk about here in a little bit. Many, of course, have asked whether they can mandate it. They're seeing the light at the end of the tunnel with this pandemic, and they believe vaccinations are the way to get to the end of this pandemic and not lose so many people in their workforce who are being sick or exposed to COVID. So if you have those questions about whether to mandate or not, I will tell you that most, if not all, companies, at least here that we're dealing with in Pennsylvania, are not mandating it, but that obviously could change as we see how conditions progress through the spring and summer. Leslie, I'd love to hear your thoughts and what you're hearing from your clients on mandating the vaccine.
Yeah, none of the clients that I work with are mandating. They're strongly urging. And when we get to my piece of this presentation, I'll talk about some of the incentives employers are trying to incentivize employees to get the vaccine and to make sure that there are no obstacles to successfully achieving the vaccine. So you're exactly right. I'm not seeing absolutely a single employer mandating it.
Next slide. Thanks, Leslie. Okay, Leslie's going to talk more in depth about this, but from our perspective at Barley Snyder, we're seeing some incentives, offering time off to go get it, some financial remuneration or bonuses. But I'll let Leslie talk about what she's seeing on her end with incentives for employees. Next slide. So if you do mandate the vaccine, or you provide a significant incentive, you need to keep in mind two things. There's the Americans with Disabilities Act, and there's Title VII of the Civil Rights Act. Both are federal statutes. The ADA, as it says, protects individuals with disabilities, and Title VII protects those in what are designated protected classifications, and the one we're concerned about today is religion. Some people have a religious objection to receiving vaccines, not just COVID vaccines, but any vaccines. And so we need to make accommodations for those people who have a disability and cannot receive the vaccination because of that disability, or they have a sincerely held religious belief that prohibits them from receiving the vaccination. So let's talk first about the ADA. Next slide. So it protects those with a qualified disability, and we need to provide a reasonable accommodation. In this case, the reasonable accommodation would be not to obviously force them to get the shot, and to provide some other way of protecting them and others in the workforce. Next slide. It does require a good faith interactive process. So if you do mandate the vaccine or you have significant incentives for employees, you may have an employee that comes to you and says, I have a medical condition, I can't get the vaccination according to my doctor. So you talk about it, you can obtain information from them, a doctor's note or anything that would indicate to you that there is a legitimate disability as defined by the ADA, and that they are not able to get the vaccination at this time. Next slide. So you do want to have a protocol in place, and this will be no different than what you do for any ADA situation. There should be one person an employee comes to, hopefully somebody in HR who knows how to handle these matters. And you go through the normal process of evaluating the medical information you are receiving to make sure it's valid and fits the definition of disability in the ADA. Just to let you know, if you do receive that medical information, as with any medical information, it needs to be kept in a separate file from the personnel file. Next slide. All right, Title VII, as I indicated, prohibits discrimination on the basis of religion. You may have individuals that approach you and say, look, I can't get the vaccination. You can't mandate me to get it. Or if you're providing a significant incentive, they might come to you and say, gee, I'd like to have the $500 bonus, but I have this sincerely held religious belief that prohibits me from getting the vaccination. What can we do about it? Next slide. What is a religion under Title VII? Well, it's not just limited to a traditional organized religion. It can be any sincerely held belief, as well as the practice that the person has on a regular basis. Next. It does not include anti-vaccination beliefs. And so you might get a lot of pushback from people that just either one, don't like to be vaccinated, what we call the anti-vaxxers out there. There could be persons that think that this particular vaccination, the COVID vaccination, has been rushed and it's not safe. They don't trust it. They want to wait and see what happens with it. They may all have legitimate concerns about the vaccination, but it's not going to be under the religious exemption of Title VII. Next slide. What do you want to look for to see if somebody has a sincerely held religious belief, especially those that profess a religious belief outside of the normal organized religions that have either scripture or tenets or some kind of written materials that a person can easily provide to you. So you want to look at their vaccination history. If they've been getting vaccinated all along, but now say that they can't because of the COVID vaccination, that's going to be a red flag. You want to look at the timing, obviously, of it and whether it's inconsistent with the employee's claim to religious faith tradition. There might be even something on social media. They might be telling you that they have a sincerely held religious belief that prohibits them from getting the vaccination. But on social media, they're really not saying anything about that, but saying this COVID vaccine has been rushed, it's unsafe, they don't know what they're doing. That could undercut their claim of a religious belief. Next slide. Again, for evaluating the sincerity of a person's religious belief exemption, you should, of course, ask them to describe it. They can provide some kind of documentation, maybe a statement from a religious leader. You could even have somebody outside of your organization evaluate it so you don't get involved with it. Some retired judges and law professors are actually doing that kind of work right now. But the final call is going to be up to you. Next slide.
Okay.
All right, Leslie, I'm going to turn it over to you, and especially as we mentioned at the top of the program, Congress's recent law that did some things with the credits.
Great. Thank you very much, Mike. Yeah, our presentations dovetail together very nicely, and I hope that the participants find this to be of value. So I'd like to start by sort of catching up where things stand. So the Families First Coronavirus Response Act, FFCRA, that provides COVID-19 related paid sick leave expired on December 31st of 2020. That meant employers no longer were required by that law to provide paid leave. Congress then extended the tax credit for employers who voluntarily continued to offer COVID-related paid sick leave through March 31st of 2021. And then just 2 weeks ago, on March the 11th, President Biden signed the American Rescue Plan Act, which extends the employer tax credit through September 30 of 2021. So the translation of this is that employers are no longer required to offer such leave, but this tax credit allows employers to do so, employers with less than 500 employees. The practical application that we are seeing is if someone tests positive for COVID-19 or someone in their household tests positive and an employer is trying desperately to keep that individual from coming to work, businesses are using this voluntary tax credit and they are continuing to pay for the leave that employees are taking. Something that surprised me with the American Rescue Act is that qualified leave now may include time off to obtain the vaccination, and employees may take the paid leave to recover from the side effects related to the vaccine. I think we've all heard that some of the vaccinations, once they had the second one, there are sometimes fever, chills, just general sort of achiness. This is now permitted as part of that paid leave, and employees may take paid time off while awaiting results of a COVID test. So, so it's a lot more broad than the law that was set to expire on March 31st. Next slide, please. So the American Rescue Plan also added that businesses are required to subsidize 100% of the premium for eligible COBRA recipients for continuation coverage if they lose their job because of the pandemic. Employers may claim a refundable tax credit against their Medicare payroll tax liability for the cost of the premiums. And this is set to begin on April the 1st and ends on September 30th. So this provides eligibility to individuals who lose active health insurance coverage as a result of a reduction in hours, not only an involuntary termination of employment. I can tell you from practical experience that when Businesses were downsizing and doing temporary layoffs back when the pandemic began a year ago. Insurance companies were kind of looking the other way. They were saying, well, just keep them on your plan for a little while. This now finally defines this and who is covered and who isn't covered, and now puts the onus on the employer to actually pay this COBRA continuation, which is brand new for all of us to consider. Next slide, please. This includes premiums for covered dependents, allowing them to stay on your company-sponsored health plan. Once the individual becomes eligible for coverage under another group health plan or Medicare, they no longer are available for this employer-paid COBRA continuation. And I have read that individuals are required to notify their group health plan if they become eligible for such coverage, and they would be subject to a penalty if they fail to do so. So, I think we're all a little concerned about bad actors and maybe even double dipping with insurance, but the onus ends up being on the employee once they get new insurance or new eligibility through a new employer. We're certainly awaiting Department of Labor guidance and compliance assistance, including notices. So stay tuned, because this is probably within the next week, we're going to see a lot more about this. I'd like to point out, and I've already had an employer ask me this relief for the COBRA payments is not available for employees who voluntarily end employment. So it feels like there could be a free-for-all in front of us if we aren't clear about how this is administered.
Hey, Leslie,
Okay.
if I could jump in on your COBRA conversation just a second. There are a number of times when employers offer severance packages to employees that they're terminating. And sometimes employers offer to pay the COBRA premium for a period of time after the involuntary separation. Because now there's this government subsidy of the COBRA, it might be something an employer looks at and not provide the, not subsidize or pay for the COBRA premium because the government is. So that's something to keep in mind, employers, if you're going to be offering a severance package to employees you're letting go, at least through September. Thanks, Leslie.
Good, thank you very much. All right, Jen, next slide, please. All right, so we had spoken in the beginning. I'm going to follow up some of Mike's legal guidance regarding vaccinations and the kind of practical items that employers are being urged to do. Employers are urged to educate employees to get vaccinated. So what we're trying to do is remove the fear and misinformation to help employees make informed decisions. So employers are encouraged to educate employees on the pros and cons of the vaccine, to ensure employees have the necessary information to make informed decisions. So, all the misinformation that is out there, if you can demystify, debunk those myths and provide people with the fact patterns, it'll help employees to arrive at their decision about getting vaccinated. And if you, I don't know if you're on the CDC website very often, I think most of us are. It's recently issued COVID vaccine communication toolbox, and you can go to the link for the CDC. If you click to the next slide, Jen, here's one of the sample posters. It's one of the posters available on the CDC website, and all of us are being encouraged to provide our employees with these notices so that they have the reminders of what to do and more detail about getting vaccinated. So education is absolutely mission critical. Next slide, please. Then, as Mike had referenced, employers are providing incentives to encourage employees to get vaccinated. The objective is to remove the obstacles for workers to access vaccines if they so choose. You want to be flexible as an employer and establish a policy that allows employees to take paid leave in order to get vaccinated. Some of the things we're seeing, and I've done some research, so this is nationwide, this is not just local to Pennsylvania. According to the Society of Human Resources Management, many businesses are offering paid time off. This feels like jury duty leave, time off to vote, where you get 2 hours per injection. 4 hours paid total leave. Some businesses are paying the cost associated with vaccine administration. Sometimes there's an injection fee if you're going to a private provider. Businesses are paying bonuses. They're paying gift cards. I saw something sort of tongue-in-cheek that employees who are vaccinated at one business are getting a free donut. One of the things to be careful about is that your incentives are available to all and are not discriminatory. And this harkens back to what Mike was talking about, the religious accommodation, the medical accommodation. If there's some way that your incentive is somehow construed as discriminatory, you want to be mindful of that. Again, if the majority of your staff is vaccinated, the risk of transmission and exposure in your workplace will be greatly reduced, and that's what we're all aiming for. I recently learned I'm a member of the Chesapeake Human Resources Association, and larger employers that are deemed to be, what are they called? Essential employers, so manufacturers who are deemed to be essential, are now able to partner with the larger pharmacies. I know of a manufacturer in the Baltimore region who has now partnered with Rite Aid, and they are going to offer the vaccine on site. And so again, the more obstacles we're able to remove, the probably more likely employees will line up and roll up their shirt sleeve. One of the things that we're thinking is going to happen down the road is possibly this turns into our annual flu clinic, like most employers or many employers offer to their employees. I don't think any of us have all the fact pattern on this, but it does feel as though they're going to need to be boosters for the COVID vaccine. And as the vaccine becomes more readily available, hopefully employers can make this a no-brainer and an easy decision. So next slide, please. So these last few slides truly only touch on issues that warrant their own webinar for an hour or more. So we'll simply heighten your awareness. You're all in executive roles and leadership roles for the employees that you work for, and we want to make you aware of some of the issues that we're seeing from a human resources standpoint. Remote work and employee engagement are significant issues right now. Since COVID-19 pandemic began in March of 2020, greater than 63% of U.S. employees are working remotely. Just to define the topic or the subject engagement, it is the level of an employee's positive or negative emotional connection to his or her organization, job, and colleagues. Employers need to provide clear goals, expectations, values, and understanding of job performance. Next slide, please. So here are some considerations about employee engagement. Employers need to provide regular communication, including one-on-one manager-employee interactions. The isolation of remote work causes uncertainty about job stability, and it erodes trust. It erodes trust from both perspectives. Employees are logging on earlier, working later, not taking lunch, fearing that their supervisors or their management don't believe that they're doing their job. And it's a very stress-inducing issue. And then there are managers who have become helicopter managers, and they're checking in on their employees extraordinarily frequently, which again erodes the employees' productivity. And so there's some push and pull and some tugging that's happening with regard to engagement. Burnout is real. Pandemic fatigue is real. Zoom fatigue is real. I think everyone's really ready to not be doing these little tiny boxes on their computer screens. And employers need to consider the mental health of their employees and consider offering resources to support your employees. I think we have a couple participants from WellSpan. WellSpan offers a really robust employee assistance program that employees who are feeling stressed, who are in need of some counseling and therapies, we want to make sure employees are doing that. Encourage your employees to take time off for self-care. We're seeing in general that employees have been banking their vacation in some cases in 2020. There was a use it or lose it and people didn't take it. Certainly the ability to travel was curtailed, but still the ability to take time off. We want to encourage our employees to take care of themselves. We're also seeing a new concept of conducting stay interviews by third parties. I've worked with a few businesses who they did their own internal survey monkey of, how are you doing? Well, when they know that the person in HR in the building can see every single answer, the only answer they're going to give is, I'm fine, everything's good. And so when stay interviews are conducted by a third party, a neutral organization that can just provide the results, we're finding that employees are being more honest. Like, yeah, I really, really hate working from home, or gosh, I don't ever want to go in the building again, whatever that answer is. Another thing we have found is reward and recognition programs, and just the ability to have camaraderie has just gone away. I've had multiple employers tell me, oh, we've had reward programs, and we used to do these recognition lunches once a month. We haven't done that in a year. And so that employee culture, the gooey, sticky stuff that makes people want to work for your business has really started to uncouple. And we want to be sure that we reconnect our employees with our businesses. I also want to point out that one of the things that our business does for our clients from time to time, will help with a strategic search. And when we conduct telephone interviews for our clients, one of the things I'm learning when I say, is this a good time? Can you speak right now? And I'm calling at 10 in the morning. Many times a candidate who has submitted their resume for an ad we're running will say, oh, it's fine, there's no one around, I'm working in my home office. And I'm not sure that employers are aware of the fact that it's not hard for your employees to be snatched away from you, or to at least be looking at other opportunities. And so I just want to heighten your awareness to that fact, and help you to, not in a disciplinary or negative way, but to re-engage with your employees who are remote. Next slide, please. And on that note, there are a lot of white papers that are coming out for the Society of Human Resources Management. The turnover is expected to soar in 2021 as the pandemic subsides. The top two reasons that employees are considering leaving their employers is compensation and benefits. And the second is work-life balance. And I think all of us have spoken to people who say, I'm really burned out. My coworkers have been out on leave. I'm doing more than one person's job. I really don't feel valued in my organization. You can continue what the storyline is. But retention experts predict that voluntary resignations in 2021 will increase dramatically. And as I said, it's pretty easy for remote workers to apply for jobs and interview. Businesses are using LinkedIn. If our employees who we've encouraged to have a LinkedIn profile, these messages are going to their inboxes, and there's kind of no check and balance now. And then we're also seeing two other interesting phenomena, that there is an increase in retirements, in early retirements even, where people have been home, they've spent more quality family time, home time, they were fearing retirement. Now they're like, I'm good. I'm not sure I'm going to go back when everybody goes back into the building. And so we have been guiding our employers, our clients, to talk about succession planning and cross-training. Do we have more than one person who has the institutional knowledge, the proverbial keys to the kingdom? And then, of course, there are reasons related to health and family. And I think even Time Magazine, in their, I think 2 weeks ago, had an article about the huge disproportionate loss of females from the workforce due to health and family issues. So care of ill family members, homeschooling that all of us have been thrust into. And so, there's another loss of individuals that we could never have predicted. And we're going to want to entice people to return to the office when they're able, and provide some flexibility so that we don't lose more workers. So our intent here has been to really heighten our attendees' awareness of the issues, and allow you to plan for and be prepared for what the new normal is. And new normal is definitely in quotes, because I'm not sure we know what it is yet, but it's coming as our workforces become vaccinated, and hopefully for all of us, the pandemic does in fact subside. We'd like to thank you for your time today. I know that we have sufficient time for questions. We'll turn it over to Haley and Jennifer if there's any further questions that you'd like to ask at this time. Thank you for your time.
Leslie, I want to follow up on the vaccination card and proof of vaccination. I know many of our clients are asking the employees whether they have been vaccinated, whether they will be vaccinated. Some are requiring proof of vaccination so they can keep track, especially healthcare providers. The EEOC has allowed employers to collect that data. You as an employer are permitted to ask an employee for proof of vaccination, that CDC card that we showed you earlier on the slide. I know that just seems counterintuitive, especially those in HR, to ask somebody for what seems to be medical information. But you're allowed under the EEOC because of the pandemic and the unusual circumstances surrounding this pandemic. You can ask for that vaccine card. What you want to be careful about is asking for anything beyond that. Don't let your employees provide you with any background medical information. It's just the card. Have you been vaccinated or not, period. Some employees will want to go on and on about, why they couldn't get it in time, or they had this condition, they had to get it cleared. That's going to raise some issues. So even for those that decide not to be vaccinated, you can't follow up and ask them why, because that, again, may divulge medical information that you're not permitted to know about, or it could have an employee reveal some genetic information that also is protected under federal law. So again, if you're not mandating the vaccines, but you're strongly encouraging it, keeping track of it, if you've got a large number of employees who have not been vaccinated, just leave it at that. Don't ask them why. Don't pester them for reasons at this point.
Okay.
I know that our informal polling from our healthcare clients, especially Leslie, we're seeing about a 50 to 60% vaccination rate. I think that matches what I've been seeing published nationwide. Nursing home workers, for some reason, are even less likely to be vaccinated than regular healthcare providers. I'm not sure why, but I've seen some studies indicating that might be the case. Some nursing homes are reporting less than 50% vaccination. I'm not sure that's going to increase. Phase 1A in Pennsylvania has been in place since December. So I believe that the vaccinations for the healthcare providers are available. So we'll see if those percentages start to increase as we move through the springtime. But I know some HR and executives in the healthcare field have been surprised by those numbers. Frankly, some of them have been discouraged that they're not getting above 75% or 80% vaccination rates. Are you hearing anything on your end?
No, the truth is that I have sort of a full spectrum. I work with one client that goes into nursing homes, and so they were deemed essential. And so they got 100% of their population vaccinated, and they felt like they, won the lottery because, they jumped to the front of the line, employees that otherwise would be, in phase 2 at the tail end of the process. And then I have other businesses, other client organizations who say, we really, we're not seeing that employees, when they become eligible, would like to get the vaccination. So I think your 50 to 60% rate in your poll kind of holds true based on the spectrum I'm seeing.
Well, just as a follow-up on the new American Rescue Plan Act, Leslie, you did an excellent job summarizing that because it is a complicated law. One other aspect that changed is that the paid FMLA has now been expanded beyond just childcare to any of the other conditions that were previously approved for the paid sick leave part of it, as well as Leslie said, the getting the vaccine or having side effects from the vaccine. So that also is an increase in the benefit that would be available to employees if you decide as an employer to opt in. I know Leslie and I were talking offline before we started this webinar on where employers stand on opting in to get the tax credit to voluntarily comply with the act, with its enhancements. Some are just jumping right in and providing the tax credit. Others are still analyzing it, not sure what they're going to do. You have another week to make up your mind. And then others are, I think, frankly, as you said earlier, Leslie, experiencing COVID fatigue and have said, I'm done trying to comply with these government incentives, and we're just going to go with what we've done before with paid time off and it's available for employees.
Well, I'm curious, and I don't know, Emily, I'm sorry, Haley, if you have any ability to engage the attendees, and maybe Mike, you can share with us from Barley's perspective, but what's the timeline people are thinking employees are going to start to come back to the bricks and mortar buildings that have been vacant for all these months? You know, I've heard different rates, and the one I hear the most is summertime, like between June and July. You know, businesses are going to start to encourage people to come back. But if any of the attendees want to share what they're doing, or Mike, if you know what your clients are doing, is there a time frame?
I'm hearing the same thing. Late spring, summer. I think they want to see how the rates, the COVID positive rates look like as we get into the spring and summer, as well as what kind of effect the vaccination will have on that, including hospitalizations, deaths, things like that. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think you're right, Leslie. It's looking like spring, summer, late spring, summertime. All right, Haley, I'm not seeing any questions coming up on my view of the chat box, unless you're seeing something on your end. Okay.
I do not have any right now popping through. Anyone that's on, is there anything that you would like to have brought up or asked before we wrap things up for today, this morning? All right. Wonderful. And if you are interested in contacting either Mike or Leslie after this, please reach out and I can give you that information as well. So again, I'd like to thank both of our presenters today and both of you for working very hard on pulling this together. And we really appreciate your time. And again, to our attendees, I'll share this with you guys so that you'll have it far after just this webinar ends. So thank you again and great job this morning. And we will talk to you all soon.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody. Have a great weekend.
You too.
Bye, guys.
Thank you.